Now, let me tell you about what my thoughts about being an undercover is. This is something you can't teach. You either have this or you don't have this. You have to be outgoing personality. You have to be comfortable around people not like you and maybe that you don't even like. You have to be a person like a chameleon. You have to be, of course, extroverted. Now, if you don't have these skills in your personality at that age of your life, you're not going to get it. We are what we are, you know? So if you think that, oh man, I'm a bookworm, I'm this, but I want to become an undercover agent, so I want to go to the school and become one. You're going to wind up getting yourself hurt or somebody hurt along the way.
Welcome to Game of Crimes. Welcome back, amigos, players, playerettes, dudettes, everybody in between. Welcome back to another fascinating, scintillating, tintillating, absquatulating, which means to flee, episode of Game of Crimes. I am your host with the most hair, Morgan Wright, welcoming you back, literally here with my partner in crime.
Hey, everybody, it's Murph, and sorry about that. What was that word you used?
Absquatulating.
Okay. Is that something you just looked up or just came to mind?
No, actually, that was the word of the day. I used that on a defense attorney one time. We used to have this thing going back and forth, and he was a brilliant guy. I mean, just too bad he was a defense attorney, but he would come up with the word of the day. And so I said, okay. I said, well, how come you didn't do X, Y, or Z? I said, well, I couldn't because your client absquatulated. And he looked at me for a second. He goes, okay, well played. What does that mean? Well, absquatulate means to flee, to depart, to run away. So your client absquatulated.
So you won that day. That's good.
I won that day. Yeah. Anyway, hey guys, welcome back. Neither Murph or I will be absquatulating until this episode is over.
True. And I hope I won't ever be doing that. I'm not sure that's what that means, but hey, we'll go with what he says.
It
today.
is. You can look it up. I won't kid you on that one. So, hey guys, welcome back. Thank you for joining us. The script calls for small talk, which we just did, and housekeeping. So now we're in the housekeeping portion. Hey, head on over to Apple, Spotify, those 5 stars, hit those reviews. Really helps us out quite a bit. We've been seeing a lot of impact from that, so we really appreciate you guys doing that for us. Just head on over, give those 5 stars, drop in some comments, let us know what you think. Also, at the same time, head on over to our website, gameofcrimespodcast.com. We've got everything. We've got our book list, our merch. By the way, our guest we'll be talking about today, he's got a book. Mm-hmm. So we're going to be talking about that. He's got a book too. Also, follow us on social media at Game of Crimes on Twitter, at Game of Crimes on Facebook, and the Instagram. Hey, somebody took issue with me calling it the Instagram. It's like the Ohio State. It's just what I do. I just call it the Instagram,
It's like if you're in California, you call the interstate the I-4 or the 10 or whatever.
The 10, yeah, the 10, the 4, yeah. Anyway, hey, guess where else you got to be though, Murph? Let me ask you one time, but very quickly, 3 times. Where you got to be, where you got to be, where you got to be.
You got to come on over on Patreon and check out what's going on over there. There's a lot of extra content that you're not going to hear on the regular podcast. It's not so much just interviewing guests as we have a couple fun things. We have the Q&A, the monthly Q&A. We'll rate a movie, a law enforcement related movie. We have a section called You Can't Make This Shit Up, which is hilarious.
You can't.
We have 911, What's Your Emergency, which is more analytical, and it tests your investigative abilities. Morgan surprises me with a case every month, and we go over that. And it's just...
Well, Mark, at your age, I got to tell you, it's the same case every month. Just at your age, you think it's a new case.
Well, hey, whatever works for us. If we can get our listeners to come on over, we're good with it. But and we have a couple episodes where we just kind of take a current event and give you our opinion, and we solicit your input back. And it's all fun. Just come over and give us a shot. Try it. If you don't like it, well, you're going to be stuck with us. He's pointing at me because he thought I was going to use the C word here.
Don't use the C word.
But just come over and try it and see what you think. There's levels there. Things that you're not going to hear anywhere else. So give us a shot.
Yeah, because Murph said so. By the way, you didn't see my little thing I posted on Facebook, did you?
About West Virginia being reincarnated.
Yeah, if you die and come back as a hillbilly, is that called reincarnation?
Yep, that's it, brother. That I have full intentions of responding to that.
All right, just as soon as you can think of something clever to say.
Well, and
So-
I saw somebody responded back and said, "Oh, I just figured out you guys have the Kansas hillbilly thing going on. Your little shtick going back and forth." It's like, yeah, that's good.
Yeah, it's our cover. Yes. It's like Peter Sellers and Inspector Clouseau. Is he really that dumb or is he crazy like a fox? We'll never know.
Well, but we have fun. That's the
Yeah.
thing. So come on over and give us a shot on Patreon.
Yeah, and if you just want to do a pause for the cause, paypal.com, use our email, gameofcrimespodcast@gmail.com or paypal.me/gameofcrimes. Whatever makes it easier for you to support the show and help us bring you even more exciting content. Now, for the disclaimer.
Mm-hmm.
Every show has to have a disclaimer. We should have dramatic music while we do the disclaimer. Here we go. We'll do dramatic music like this. This is a show about crime. We talk about bad people doing bad things and bad people doing bad things to good people. We take the story seriously, but...
Turn the music off because we're going to have some fun. We never take ourselves serious here.
I don't know. We have a little soundboard here we're playing. Yeah, we do. But before we get into it, Murph, guess what time it is? Guess what time it is? Guess what time it is?
I bet it's time for
Small Town Police Blotter. Da-da-da-da-da. And let me tell you, we have collected a variety of stories over, in the last 66 episodes going on. I mean, we're talking over getting close to 200 stories that we've done. So it's becoming harder and harder to find stories. But for you, I scowl the bowels of the internet. Scour the bowels of the scowl. I scowl at the bowels. That means I have a frown at your rear end. Okay.
Okay, it's getting nasty. Nasty.
Well, Steve, this one comes from an area you might know. Have you ever heard of a little place called Boone, North Carolina?
Oh, yeah. In fact, that's where Appalachian State is.
Boone, North Carolina, Friday night. Boone police received a report of suspicious behavior in the 1300 block of Marshall Street. Turned out to be 4 males with flashlights comparing facial hair growth.
Oh, what?
Look at my mullet and my beard.
I tell you what, if that's what's going on in Boone, that is suspicious. What the hell y'all doing out there?
Oh my gosh, yeah, just comparing facial hair. Okay, maybe they're young, they're old. I don't know. That's what.
Probably students from Appalachian State over there. By the way, they got watched them play football yesterday.
I watched that game too, man.
Exciting.
Yeah. That was the biggest, next to a bank robbery, that's the biggest shootout I've seen in a long time. 40 points in the fourth quarter alone.
Yeah. I mean, Connie and I were watching it, and I said the final score looked more like a basketball score than it did a college football score.
Apparently, defense was optional in that game. But hey, we digress. Drinking game.
Now, one more question. Do you know what their mascot is?
Appalachian State? Yeah, it's a Mountaineer. Somebody wears a coonskin hat.
They kind of come in under West Virginia Mountaineers, but hey, they're Mountaineers.
They're Mountaineers.
Go Appy State.
Go Appy State. All right. Hey, on 321-14, guess what?
What?
An officer checked on a subject running down Cougar Lake Drive and stopped to make sure everything was okay. Steve, did you know the student had just walked his girlfriend back to her apartment on what's called the 400 side, and after watching a scary movie, he was running back to his apartment after being frightened?
I got to tell you, I don't watch scary movies for that same reason.
And you're not going to do her a lot of good if you can't watch a scary movie, then walk yourself home. I'll tell you what.
Well, get her home safely, and then what she doesn't know, that's okay.
Yeah. Run away. Well, speaking of that, today my middle son is coming over. We are watching Monty Python and the Holy Grail over this Labor Day weekend.
Too much free time on your hands. I got to find more for you to do.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, pal. So hey, here's what else you can do. At 1:30 a.m., we can go out and issue trespass warnings for something like this.
All right.
A non-student was issued a trespass warning in Dan Allen Deck. He had removed his pants and underwear and sat on the hood of a vehicle not belonging to him and rubbed his buttocks on the hood of the vehicle.
And he got a citation for that, huh? Not for exposing himself or anything? Well, maybe, I guess it was private property, which led to the trespassing.
Hey, but you know what? Maybe he thought the vehicle needed a racing stripe.
Where's
Where's that drum thing? There we go.
There you go.
Thank you. I'll be playing here all week. I promise you, folks, we won't use this stuff again. It's just we're trying out a new platform. It's got a couple built-in sound effects. We thought we would, entertain you with some of this new technology we are using. Well, hey,
Well, it just shows that we're trying to bring on the latest technology, so you guys get the best quality that you can from
the
us.
best quality that you can. Hey, by the way, speaking of quality, we got a quality guest. We
Yes,
got
we
a real
do.
quality guest, even though he's from the FBI. He's quality guy.
Now he's a big boy. I wouldn't take him off too much.
Like I said, just as long as I can run first, he'll have a hard time catching. But if he gets a hold of me, I'm toast.
Yep, I believe so. This is a guy. It took us a while to get him on because he's quite a bit in demand. He's very well known. He's got his book out that Morgan mentioned earlier, The Making Jack Falcone, which you'll see on our book page. But we're bringing on this week Mr. Jack Garcia, retired FBI agent. And I love this story because this is not getting too far in the story, but just preface it with this. This is a Cuban-born American who worked undercover and infiltrated one of the mafia crime families for 3 years, portraying himself as an Italian.
Italian.
And they were going to make him a made guy. I mean, now that's an undercover accomplishment. A Cuban American portraying himself as an Italian.
And in the first part of his story, it almost sounded like the story of Luis Navia, born in Cuba. Parents fled because of Fidel Castro. I mean, it's a small nation. I bet you if we go back far enough, they knew each other. But the other interesting thing, though, too, Steve, is he had a test to find out if you're really Italian or not. And you said, hey, let's go eat at Olive Garden. And he said he about fell out of his chair.
Well, I want to know if he's authentic or not. It says Olive Garden, authentic Italian.
Yeah, I don't think it is. Well, hey, no, this is going to be a great one, too, because Jack, great guy, great story. I'll tell you what, this is what the American story is supposed to be all about, the American dream. Here's somebody who comes to this country, you'll find out how he became an American citizen.
Mm-hmm.
But this guy joins the FBI, I think one of the first or second Cuban-born FBI agent they've ever had. And it's just a story of persistence, but this guy served his country. And the other stuff he did too, Steve, I think what he did when he investigated police corruption, Murph and I both say nobody hates a bad cop more than a good cop, and what they did to take down. And I'm not just talking about people who jaywalked and illegally parked. We're talking about people who are involved in major corruption,
Absolutely.
drug dealing, things like that. So got a couple great stories on that. But Steve, we will never get to the story if I keep pontificating and I don't allow you to say, are you ready to play the biggest, baddest, most dangerous, and Olive Garden friendly game of all, the game of crimes?
Yeah, I tell you what, when you guys get into the story, what I'm getting ready to say is going to mean so much more this time because this is very exciting. So get in, sit down, shut up, hold on, bring on Jack Garcia, Mr. Jack Falcone.
Once again, state and local law enforcement comes to the rescue for the FBI. And what do I get? I get trashed by this guy already. He doesn't even know me.
Well, that's what we do. That's what we do best. We trash everybody and build ourselves up.
Then put out a press release. Don't forget the press
Excluding
release.
you guys.
That's all right. We're used to it.
Oh man! Well, we had a couple technical challenges. We overcame them, and then once we were starting this, I decided, it's like the episode we just did with John Kufta that we were just talking about. Once again. Oh, look! He's already putting on the shades too, man.
He's glasses. These are regular glasses. Do they come out shady?
Oh, okay. Well, you come out shady. I don't know. You go ahead, and put them on. Don't let us stop you.
No, this way I could see you guys better. There you go. How about now? I don't put on shade. I'm not into that shade hats or any of that disguise stuff. All right. This is legit.
This is
go.
Well, we probably ought to let everybody know what we're doing. So we have yet another episode. This one's going to be good because this, as you can already tell from this guy, it's got something to do with wise guys. So welcome to the podcast, to our show of shows, Game of Crimes, former FBI Special Agent Jack Garcia.
How you guys doing over there?
How you doing? I'm doing good. How you doing?
Hey, I got to ask you, Jack, what part of the South are you from? Like South Bronx?
The South Bronx. I'm actually from Havana, Cuba. So figure that out.
There you go.
But I grew up in Washington Heights, and then the Bronx is where I came from. And notice the Bronx is the only city with a prefix. Think about that.
The Bronx. Yeah, because people call it people say, are you from the Ukraine? It's not the Ukraine, it's Ukraine. But the Bronx is the only place that has to have the in there, like the Ohio State, the Bronx. Yeah.
And it's exactly, it is the only one. I love the Bronx. It's changed a lot since I was there, let me tell you.
So when you speak Spanish, does it come out with a New York accent or what?
No, it comes out like a Cuban accent. That's one thing about Spanish. We're able to detect like where you're from, like if you're a Mexican or a Colombian, just by the way we speak and the accent that we carry. So it's very distinct. Like when I used to work undercover, I never posed as a Colombian because they speak in a different manner, or Dominican or Puerto Rican or Cuban. So once they hear me speak in Spanish, they know right away I'm off the boat Cuban.
Cubano. So let's hear something in Cuban.
Well, no, first of all, it's Spanish. It was not Cuban because we have the same.
I love it.
We are strictly speak Spanish. And like, oye, chico, ¿qué pasa? ¿Cómo está? ¿Cómo va todo bien? Tengo una hambre horrible. Te lo digo.
So when you're listening to that, what makes it Cuban versus Colombian?
Well, many. Like, for instance, I'll give you an example. Puerto Ricans, their dialect, sometimes they omit rolling the R. So we'll say carro, car. They would say cajo. You see, a Dominican would say esta vaina, tigrazo, that kind of way. Mexican, when they talk, it's more like singing, oye, chico, ¿cómo estás? ¿Cómo va todo por ahí? And it's a distinct way. And Colombians also have their own dialect. So it's very difficult to imitate you being from a different part of the world to someone because they know right away. And the minute I speak, they go, oh, you're Cuban, right? And right away, they're able to tell.
So, mi español es perfecto because I can roll my R's. I can go, arriba. See, Murph can't do that.
Yeah.
Well, let's see if he can do it.
But Jack, when I learned Spanish, I mean, you can tell from my accent, I'm not from the North. So when I walk in the room, it's hola, y'all.
Hola, baby.
Well, that's the same thing in English. Think about that. We could tell someone from the South by the way they talk, y'all, how you doing, that kind of stuff. As far as to a Yankee, New Yorkers, we have this distinct accent and mannerism of speaking that people right away say to me, oh, you're from New York, right? Just because the way we are. We're the same thing in the Spanish world. We're able to tell where you're kind of from.
And people from Kansas, we can't figure out what the heck they sound like. They sound like him. They sound like Morgan.
Yeah. Is that where Morgan is from, Kansas?
They won't claim him, but he says he is.
Yeah. That's funny coming from you, Murph, somebody from the hills of Tennessee who grew up moonshining before he became a Fed.
You got to have a retirement job. You got to have a retirement job,
That doesn't make him a bad guy.
That's right. You're only a moonshiner if you get caught.
Yeah,
exactly. By the way,
I was in college in Richmond. Everybody was moonshining down in Richmond.
Yeah. Well, here's a piece of law enforcement trivia. So the Carroll Doctrine that came from the searches of vehicles, 1928. Guess what? That was because agents stopped people hauling moonshine. Believe it was in Ohio. Wow. And that's what set the whole Carroll Doctrine about searching vehicles was moonshine, Murph. So you're just carrying on a tradition, as George, or as Hank Williams said, it's just a family tradition.
That's right.
Well, moonshining is what created and made the mafia that powerful because they control all of the, during the
prohibition.
The prohibition as far as that. So they handled the distribution, the homes, and all that. So they kind of blossomed that way, and the power that they obtained because of prohibition was kind of the beginning of the mob.
So now, did you work UC against like Al Capone or anything? Was that back in your day?
I'm not that old now. Okay, Al Capone. No, I didn't work Al Capone. No.
I can't wait. I got to tell our listeners this. I can't wait for Jack and Morgan to meet in person because Jack, you're what, 6'4"?
Yeah, 6'4", about 390 something.
Yeah,
that's okay. I can outrun you.
Yeah, but when he catches you, he's gonna snap you.
Hey, I'm a good shot, Morgan.
There you go.
So am I. So am I. All right, but let's kind of go back and let's do this thing of ours, because we always, when we bring on our guests, and you guys already got a good idea, but we want to say, how did you get started in this thing of ours, this thing we called law enforcement? So what did you have family members? Was it something that fascinated you? How did they? And actually, before we get to that, let's start off by, were you born in Cuba? And if so, how did you get to the United States? Tell us about that.
Yeah, I was born in Cuba in 1952, and my father worked for the Cuban government at that time. It was Batista. He was part of the accounting, ran the accounting department there. Everything was well, and then of course Castro came in, and at first people supported Castro because he came under the premise that let's make Cuba for the Cubans. So at first everybody was kind of like, "Hey, this guy is getting rid of the corruption of Batista." And all of that, the mob, which was very prevalent in Havana. So what happened then after that, the Castro started changing his ideology. He started hanging out with the Russians. Next thing you know, was trying to make that into a socialist communist state. So that's when my father, with the help of the FBI attache office, was able to leave in the cover of darkness before us. And he left in 1960. We didn't leave till 1961. The next day that my father left at night, the next morning we were raided in our home by the stormtroopers, the Cuban stormtroopers looking for my dad. We had to leave our home, and then we went to live with our grandparents for a year while my father was here in America working 3 jobs to raise enough money to get us out of Cuba and bring us home, which he finally did in November of 61. Now, during that time, my father did, through my mother, get a communication from Castro's government saying, look, we checked him out. We know that he was not involved in the corruption. We want him to return. And my father, when we relayed that information, he said, okay, I'll be right over, So he came here, he raised money, and then we came in November of 61, and we've been here ever since.
Well, how did you get out of the country if they were targeting your father? Why wouldn't they hold you hostage or hold you guys back to force him to come back?
Well, they didn't do that because I guess it wasn't that severe. And also keep in mind that they were able to clear his name. And then he had to go through the legitimate way of getting us here. At that time, it was still, you had to file for a visa and all of that. We went through the process of that, the medical exams. And then finally, we were able to get out in one of the last flights directly from Havana to Miami, which is where we landed. Even though my father was in New York, we landed there for like a week. My father says, I don't want to live down here. There's too many Cubans in Miami. We went back to New York where he thought it was more of an opportunity. And we went to live in Washington Heights for a long time. So, we actually lived during the Bay of Pigs. I mean,
Bay of Pigs invasion. Yeah,
I could remember like my mom rather, putting us underneath the dining table with mattresses on top and hearing fire, gunshots and everything else. I mean, I was very frightening for a little kid. I also remember being at a private Catholic school, the Marist Brothers, when the soldiers came in and they kind of took it over because they were, of course, opposing Catholicism and everything else. I remember being there as well. So I do have some memories because I was 9 years old when I left Cuba. So, and then we came to the U.S. and didn't speak a word of English, came with just the clothes on our back, had no money. My father was working, like I said, 3 jobs. And we, after some time, we just got settled. And always my father thought we were able to come back. He actually bought round trip tickets. And that he never, of course, used. But we had the intentions that we came to this country as political refugees and that Banana Republic was going to be overthrown. But we all know what happened with that. And he's still, to this day, there's, it is what it is in Havana, Cuba.
Did he have to use any of that money to make payoffs to somebody in the Castro regime, or was it all above board?
Well, I don't know. I don't know whether he did to get us out of there, but we went the legitimate route because I remember having to be vaccinated. I remember going to countless interviews, and that's when we came here to the U.S. But I mean, I was separated from my father about a year and a half, and it was really, when you were that age, it was very difficult, and you really didn't understand. Like my mother, for instance, her sister believed in the Castro regime, so they, to their dying day, never spoke again. And if you think about it, that was just over politics, And my mother just refused to talk to her sister, who, drank the Kool-Aid about Castro and the way it is. And that happened to a lot of people in Cuba. Families were broken up, and it was very sad.
DEA, my first 4 years, I was stationed in Miami, and I'm, like Morgan said, I grew up in Tennessee and West Virginia because I'm like a cross between a redneck and a hillbilly. And I get to Miami. I mean, you talk about a fish out of water, and the enforcement group, we'd go to lunch down in Calle Ocho, and I didn't speak any Spanish. And I'm like, what the fuck did we,
Still doesn't sound like you speak any Spanish.
Did we drive across the bridge and land in Cuba? I mean, the menus are in Spanish and the waitress speaking Spanish. So it was a very eye-opening
Yeah, and
experience.
have signs too where they say we speak English.
Yeah.
I mean, we go to the cemetery to see my parents, and you buy the flowers, and my wife, who only understands it because she's Irish German, and she's kind of like, no one speaks Spanish here. I mean English, and it's kind of, everybody's assumed that you're bilingual, and it's a very international cosmopolitan city, not just with Cubans. There's a big influx of Venezuelans here in Miami as well.
Oh, it's a major mixing pot down there. But, as time went on and you get to know some of the Cuban Americans that came there to flee from Castro, I mean, we met other Cubans other than, just the Marelitos that were coming over doing all the mayhem and carnage down there with the drug trade and murders and kidnappings and so forth. But when you talk to the law-abiding Cuban Americans, you got to respect them, for having the courage to get out of their country, to come to somewhere where they think they can get a better life. And most of them do, quite honestly, it's, I love to hear them talk. I love to hear their experiences. You go down on Calle Ocho to some of those restaurants. And I've just, what's the restaurant?
Versailles.
Exactly.
Thinking about.
I like to go there just because of the history associated with planning the Bay of Pigs invasion, and great people.
Yeah.
Love it. Miami is, my wife and I, that's our favorite city in the whole United States is Miami.
Yeah, and it is very culturally. I mean, the hardcore Cubans are here. They have the Domino Park where people play dominoes. The other thing that's of kind of interest about the Cuban people here is, keep in mind, there were two influx. There were the Cubans who had the money, who were middle class and above, were able to fly out of Cuba.
Right.
But it wasn't until and this was, of course, Castro came into power in 59. We got there and it came out of 61. Castro stopped the flights direct from from Cuba to Miami, and then people had to go to Europe and come here. But the interesting thing about all of this is that the Cubans that are here we're all, enterprising people. So a lot of the representation of the hard workers, it wasn't until the Mario boat lift in 1980 where Castro literally opened the jail cells.
Yeah, we got all the prisoners.
Asylums.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, of course, the mixed in there were real legitimate people, but that's what caused the big crime wave here in Miami. And I remember the Atlanta uprising where they had the prison. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of interesting because the Atlanta uprising was based that they were going to be returned to Cuba. And they said, look, we'll stay in prison here. We don't want to go back there at all. So they decided to have this riot. And we wound up interviewing all of those prisoners. And all of them said, look, I'm here. This is where I want to stay. I don't want to go back. But these guys, you look at their criminal past, murder, robbery, thief. Of course, a lot of these guys claimed that they got arrested and got 20 years sentence for stealing a bag of beans and rice. Whether you believe that or not, I don't know. But these guys look like they were some hardcore prisoners. And a lot of the revolt was that they didn't even want to go back to Cuba because they know what their fate would have been.
That's interesting. They choose a federal prison in the United States or a state prison in the United States to going back to Cuba.
3 hots and a cot and, on Team America, man. Hey.
Yes, Leavenworth. That's where they were.
Oh, well, Leavenworth, Kansas. Yeah.
No, I'm sorry, the one in Pennsylvania. What's the one in Pennsylvania? Lewisburg.
Lewisburg. Oh, yeah. We were just talking about that with John Kufta. Hey, real quick, before we get too far from this, even though they said they had cleared your dad and everything was okay, did your dad, what did you guys believe? Had he returned, would he have been safe, do you think, or was that just a scam to get him back? Because the reason I say that, one of our other guests, I can't remember which episode it was, Murph, I think it's 29, Luis Navia.
Mhm.
Luis Navia was a major narco trafficker, got popped with 29 tons coming out of Venezuela, I think. Case worked by Customs and DEA. His family was Cuban. Their story almost emulates yours the same. They got out right when Castro came in, and the whole thing was he was a legitimate businessman. So the reason I'm saying all that is so many similarities. Luis Navia went one way, you went another. But would your father had really been safe had he returned?
That's a great question. My father in his heart felt that he would not, because he did not trust the fact that they overtook this government, in a kind of a coup. That's what Castro did. They took over, Cuba. So he never really confided, believed them either way. He knew he was not guilty, but he certainly wasn't going to go and take a chance and go there, because that wound up becoming a communist. I mean, they literally told my mother, we welcome him back to join the regime. So it was started at that time, like I said, with a lot of the Russian influence. So he wanted no part of that. He wanted to come to America because this was an opportunity that he figured the U.S. would help to take Castro out and they could return.
Yeah, if only that had happened, right? Because,
I think about that all the time, Morgan. Think about that. I was in Cuba like a little boy playing, like when you guys were little. Next thing you know,
no, dude. I'm not that old. I wasn't born yet. I was born in 60. So
He wasn't born.
Oh,
He
you
was
were born in
passed.
I was born in 52. But you're a little boy, and all of a sudden you got to pack up, you move, you don't know what's going on. And next thing you know, you're at the airport. I was cavity search as a kid coming here to America from Cuba. And I remember they calling us worms. I remember insulting. I remember the stewardess having some kind of like bug sprayer just to fuck with us, all the people on the plane. And I remember landing here with absolutely nothing in our pocket. We immediately went to our family and we built our roots here. Right? We went to live in the Heights, fifth floor walk up in Washington Heights. I remember the house was like decorated early Ralph Crandom. And my mother would always say, listen, it doesn't matter how old this house is, as long as it's clean. We used to have to get down and clean with soap the floors and the walls, and we had to keep everything pristine. And then my father then finally thought he moved on up, and he went to the Bronx because he was living in a two-family house on 234th Street and White Plains Road. That's where I lived. We went to move and got into the Mount St. Michael Academy, which was part of the Marist Brothers. And that's what my parents did throughout my life, is everything they sacrificed, they went without. And this is just not my family. A lot of immigrants, I'm sure, and not necessarily just Cubans, they went without. They didn't have the big televisions, the beautiful luxury furniture, the couch. It was everything was going into education. They wanted us to get the best education where we could be safe and secure and grow up there. My mother had to work. My mother was an opera singer in Cuba. She worked as a bookkeeper, for crying out loud, and a key punch operator. My father, who was an accountant, was working all kinds of menial jobs. And then he eventually was able to start his own accounting firm. So, but that's just not our story. That's all the immigrant stories. The one of what used to be out there with a lot of Cubans and every ethnic groups. I mean, the Irish went through it, Italians went through it. We got to America. We wanted to build the best world. Now, years later, you would always wonder if Cuba left, would my parents have packed up and taken us back to their home? I mean, they had to miss. This is their life. In the middle of the night, they left, and now they're in a new country learning a new language.
But here's a perfect example of the true American success story. That's your mom and dad. I mean, that's something to be proud of.
Well, I can't imagine as a kid getting cavity searched. Let's go back to that. Let's not gloss over that too much. When you
when you were flying out, were you flying on an American, not American Airlines, but an American-based airline, or was that something out of?
I think it was a Pan Am. I think it was America. And what happened is you had to go to a room, and then they checked you. You took your clothes off, and you checked to see if you were smuggling jewelry, because people were leaving Cuba wanting to take their personal belongings.
But you were being checked by the Cuban authorities, right? Pan Am.
The Cuban authorities, correct, not the American.
Yeah.
They wanted to make sure that everything that was from Cuba
Stayed in Cuba.
would remain in Cuba.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Wow. Well, having had a couple colonoscopies, I kind of get the feeling of what it's like to be catfished.
Yeah, listen, as a kid, you didn't understand. I mean, you cry as a kid, and then you're also, I remember so when we went from Miami to New York flying, I remember my father saying, we know in Spanish, we don't speak English. He said, just all you have to say is, I'm sorry. Americans are very forgiving. You could step on their feet, you could hit them on the side, you say, I'm sorry, and they would forgive you. And that's kind of what we learned. And then we got there, we tried to learn English. We couldn't get into Ameri school because even though we wanted to go to Ameri school, they had to take an entrance test. Now, not speaking English, how do you think I did in that entrance test? Right? So they wanted to take this big Mama Luke 9-year-old and put him like in a pre-K. And my parents said no. So I went to PS 173. They sent us to a public school until I learned English so good enough to take the test. And that's what we took it in the Bronx at the school, Mount St. Michael. And I was able to catch up with my grade. But I had to learn.
How long did that take to learn English?
Well, we had to learn English because it was kind of like an English second language. And the teacher, I always remember her, Judith Horowitz. This lady was so sweet. She helped me. Like I would say, my shoes. And she would say, it's not shoes, it's shoes. And I would practice in front of the mirrors, the SHs and all of that. I wanted to assimilate. I wanted to be able to be like the rest of the kids because I felt awkward at that time. I think that's what I did. I put in the hard work. And my father would conduct classes in English and math for us on the weekend, but his English was horrible, worse than mine. So we were learning bad English, and then we would go to school and learn the right English.
The reason I ask you that, Jack, is one of my granddaughters is here in Orlando, and she just started kindergarten this year. And in her classroom, there's a lot of Puerto Ricans around here. This is a very eclectic neighborhood that we live in, and we actually enjoy it. But in her class, I think there's her and one other girl that speak English only. And so the teacher's bilingual. She tells the class in English what she wants them to do, and then she switches over and tells them in Spanish. So her nickname, our granddaughter's nickname is Nina, because her preschool teacher was Hispanic also. I think she was Puerto Rican, and that's what she called Danielle because she's so little.
Oh, my God.
So, everybody has a little nickname, and Danielle's is Nina.
Nina, that's a cute name, though. Nina is little girl, you know that. Or a girl.
Oh,
right.
Yeah.
Well, I was thinking of the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, but that's a
There
history
you go.
lesson. But,
Because he's from Kansas.
hey, but look, I'm trying to think of the comedian's name. I'm not sure it's the guy they call Fluffy or another guy, but he was talking about teaching English coming over. He said, yeah, and then I learned, Mexican judo. He goes, what is this? Judo know if I have a knife. Judo know if I have a gun. He says, pronunciation matters.
Oh, and it does because, you wanted as a kid to assimilate because I had friends of all ethnic groups, and I just didn't keep with just Hispanics. It was English kids and Black kids and all of that. That was a part of it. And you all wanted to be, to fit in. But that was the mentality back in America, back in the, I would say in the 60s. Certainly not now,
Oh, yeah. Well, you talk about, that's why I didn't want to gloss over your background too much. The minute you said Cuba, you were born in Cuba. Okay. Oh, okay. I know where we got to go with this. And that kind of sets the stage for now getting into law enforcement. What was it during your formative years, going to the schools, or did you ever have something that came up says, this is what I want to be when I grow up? Was being a cop, well, first of all, your parents sacrificed everything and yet you still turned out to be an FBI agent. Were they ever disappointed? No, just kidding.
But wait, if I could, guys, tell you what happened to me at the school when I was a little kid at the marist schools in Cuba. The soldiers came in to oversee the teachings. So they would sit in class. And what Castro did, he put a lot of women soldiers because they were priests and brothers, and they kind of found it offensive because they would live in the courtyard, these beautiful Cuban women, soldiers, right? So I remember one day, it was a very, very hot day, and we're sitting there, it's Cuba, it's 1,000 degrees, and you're sitting there, and the soldier gets up when the teacher is teaching. He says, listen, kids, he says, how hot are you guys? Are you guys all hot? You can't take it, right? He says, why don't you all pray to your God and pray for ice cream? Wouldn't that taste good right now? So sure enough, all us kids get up and we pray, eyes closed, please, a hot day like today. Boom, and he says, all right, now open your eyes. Where is the ice cream? Where's your God? He let you down. He says, now I want you to pray to Fidel. So we said, for ice cream. So we all got there and prayed for Fidel. And another soldier came in wheeling a wagon with ice cream. That was the indoctrination that they were putting through, and the manipulation of us as children. But I'm sorry, I digress. But that is what.
Oh, wait a minute. That's part of our drinking game. I get accused of saying, but I digress. Now back to our regularly scheduled podcast. For those of you keeping track, Jack launched this. So that's drinking game number one. That's drinking number one.
It's fantastic that you're saying this, Jack, because you lived through it. It's not, and that's what our whole podcast is about. We want people telling their own stories, but the fact that there's people out here in the United States that are supporting communism, that's what communism is right there. It was a perfect example.
Yeah, exactly. It really, so many things like that. And it was just sad. But getting back to how I guess I got involved in law enforcement, I didn't give it a thought. I went to high school. I got a scholarship playing football. I went to Texas, and there what happened is they changed the coaching staff at West Texas State.
We're at in Texas.
West Texas State, yeah, where Mercury Morris and Dwayne Thomas and all those guys were. So they changed the coaching staff because they were hiring too many minorities, putting them in as athletes, and they were not hiring local folks, players. So I wound up leaving there. I went to a junior college in New York, and then from there I went to the University of Richmond. Now, all I did was the Spiders. All I ever wanted to do.
Richmond Spiders.
Richmond Spiders. And here I am from the Bronx, Cuban, in Richmond. I love Richmond. Richmond was nice. They thought I was like Ricky Ricardo. You're from New York. You carry a gun. Yeah, I got, whatever they want to hear. But everybody was very nice there. So what happened was in Richmond is we were playing the game. And before every game, the coach, to keep us from staying out of trouble, would take to see a movie. At that time, it was Serpico. So I went to see Serpico with Al Pacino, which I recommend everyone to see. Just a fantastic. And then I realized was that moment where I said, this is what I want to be. I want to be in law enforcement. I want to be NYPD. I want to be this guy because he works undercover and all that. That was it. I was set for life. This is what I want to pursue. But then me and another Cuban brother of mine that played football at Richmond, there was actually two Cubans, me and my buddy Ramon, we went and applied. Well, forget about the NYPD. Let's apply for the best law enforcement agency in the world. See, that hurts you guys, right? Say it after me. Go ahead. The best law enforcement agency in the world, the FBI.
DEA.
I know, Morgan, that's got to stab you, right? So anyway, we went to apply. I didn't hear anything from the Bureau. Then I figured, the hell with it. They don't want me for a reason. Then I came home and I applied for the NYPD, Secret Service. I applied for all local cops. Nobody was hiring in 1975. Everybody was being laid off. So what happened was I'm sitting at home watching Univision, right? And I see this non-native Spanish speaker destroying the Spanish language, saying something like, I guess sounding like Steve Murphy when he's talking Spanish with his sudden drawl. Y'all come down and if you speak Spanish and apply. And I'm going, wait a minute, I got an application. I haven't heard from them. So I next day I called the FBI. I says, hey, I've just watched Univision. You guys are looking for Spanish speakers. The guy says to me, well, let me look into it. He sure enough calls me back and he says, the reason why we never contacted you is you're not even a citizen. So I always consider myself an American. You know, you're a kid, come to this country, you just became Americanized. So I said, well, what do I got to do? He says, well, you got to apply for it. Well, at that time, you know, I went and applied, and of course I passed, and then they started processing my application. And during the interim, I got a position with the Union County Prosecutor's Office as an investigator. And then, of course, the Bureau came in, and that was how I got into law enforcement. But prior to that, I had no intention of that. I really was like every kid in college, not knowing what I was going to do, you know?
Mm-hmm. You know, I wonder, there's no way to track this, but I just wonder how many people became police officers because of that movie Serpico. Because I remember the same thing. I loved that movie.
Right. And it was something like, wow, this is picture Al Pacino, cool guy, long hair, a beard. He's got a smoking hot girlfriend. He's riding a motorcycle. He's got a sheepdog. He lives in the village. Come on, who's better than that guy? I figured this is what I want to do, you know? And it wasn't because...
See, none of that... For people outside of New York, that don't mean shit to me. Lived in the village. Okay, well, I live in a little village. We call it a town.
Yeah, well, you're right. Well, New York. But you know what's interesting? You know we're getting old. When I've given this presentation at some, you know, kid's school or something, and I mentioned Serpico, and no one knows no idea what that movie is.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, Serpico, what the hell is that? You know? But...
Well, just on the off chance we've got some youngsters out there that don't know what it is, that was a seminal movie for a variety of reasons, I think. One is because nobody had really ever taken on the issue of corruption. And Serpico was pretty much a straight up guy who violated the code, right? Because he did not put up with taking bribes. He did not put up with the way business was being done. And nearly cost him his life, nearly, you know, cost him his reputation. But just just kind of tell us about Serpico, but what was it that impacted you so much? Was it just because this was a straight up kind of guy? Or was it because you were more addicted to the action? You saw what was going on in New York?
Well, that was kind of it. I was just fascinated with the policemen that I grew up with. I grew up in the Bronx and the Heights, okay? You know, I grew up in an area where you either became a cop or a fireman or you were chased by one. You know, there was no in between, you know. So to me, every cop that I pictured was this big, tall guy with a nice stick or club you if you acted out of line. Then comes Serpico. I said, man, this guy's pretty cool. He's got a beard. Man, he's doing police work. He's undercover. He's able to infiltrate that and yet be able to maintain, you know, the code, the oath, where he's being honest, and yet he's fighting the establishment on it. Everything about that movie, just something that really fascinated me. And then, of course, the fact that, you know, he met resistance from the NYPD as far as exposing the corruption, and then ultimate his fate. I just thought I wanted to, not that I wanted to work undercover per se, because I never even thought of that at the time, but just to be an NYPD officer, I just thought it was a cool thing to do. And it was something that I would like because Serpico was working sometimes in the meat market with bookmakers. He was working with all kinds of drugs and corruption. I was just sold on the career. I didn't have a career choice prior to that. This was it. And I went forward and I tried to do everything I possibly could to get into. Now, when I took the FBI test, it was kind of funny because, and I say this in my book, I took the test and it was divine intervention because it was a lot of filling. I'll be honest, I was filling in like, well, there goes that career. I guess I'm going to do something else. I'm winging some of this stuff, some math problems. And next thing you know, I get my results back. And geez, I did well. The first time in my life that I guessed on things, I did exceptionally well. And they moved me to the next level. So I was so blessed to have gotten the opportunity.
Folks, if you're worried about the quality of FBI agents, that should tell you right there. The guy guessed his way in to the FBI.
Yeah, but at least he didn't become a fireman, right?
Well, God,
well,
no.
The police was hiring too. I've probably done that.
By the way, you mentioned your book. I want to give a quick shout out to it. It's by Joaquin, which is your
That's
given
my
name.
name.
You go by
Yes.
Jack. Making Jack Falcone, an undercover FBI agent, takes down a mafia family. We will have that listed on our book site. There, Murph, nobody can see that.
Well, Jack can. I want him to know I got his book.
He knows about the book. He wrote the damn thing.
I know, but I want him to know I got it.
You know what? I
read
was going to wear like a chain and put it on my neck.
Yeah.
You know what? It was such to me, getting into the FBI it was such a no. My parents were disappointed because they.
Hold on.
Okay.
Murph is pimping out his own book, Manhunters, the real story about how he took down Pablo.
Listen,
Okay.
kudos to Steve. Kudos to him. This man is a legend as far as I'm concerned. So I was honored to speak to him. What he did in Narcos is just, fantastic. Fantastic story.
There's a lot of Hollywood. Let's just say there's a
Not
lot of
Hollywood.
Hollywood.
There was a lot of, back then, as you know, working dope, there was a lot of bad shit went down, and you were smack in the middle of it where it happened. I mean, I was in New York fighting drugs. You were over there. That's even worse,
All right, Morgan. So you can't pick on the FBI the rest of this show now because that's my new best friend.
See, that's what we do. We divide and conquer, Morgan.
That's
so
right, with
Steve and I
Smiths.
are going to gang up.
Oh, I'm very familiar with. By the way, pal, I did do some stuff overseas. So I ran into your guys from Pakistan to Turkey to South America. So
Wow.
we crossed paths. So just be careful. I know people too. I know Lou Velosi.
I know Lou Velosi too. He's a character, man. I love Lou.
Dominic Polifrone. And by the way, we had a real wise guy on, Michael Franzese. So you know Michael?
Oh, well, yeah. Well, come on. You actually going to tap Michael Franzese? Did you and him go to church afterwards? And did he give you his religious spiel?
No, we did meet him though down at the Southern California Gang Conference. So he's an interesting guy, and needless to say, very disappointed in him because he's totally reinvented himself. I mean, but isn't that what everybody does? Isn't that the whole thing? Is you can go through, and I'm not going to pick on Michael. I'm going to talk about anybody. But you go through your whole life being a shithead. But you go to rehab. You come out of rehab and go, I'm a new guy now. I want to tell you my story about being a shithead, and now I want to make a bunch of money on it. It's kind of like, what happened to the good old people who worked their ass off all those years and didn't become a shithead and don't get to tell their story?
Thank you. I say that all the time. You hear about people saying, they want to be patted on the back because they buy their kids formula and diapers and spend the weekends. That's what you're supposed to do. A parent is supposed to take care of their child, period. You shouldn't get an applause for doing that. It's what you're supposed to do. But the same thing with people supposed to live a good, honest life. It isn't like you said, all of a sudden decide to change and now we're supposed to applaud and build you up? I don't think so.
Well, I'm going to take one more divergence and give you a real big story about that because I worked with some of the FBI guys in training, but they were a couple of the guys that brought down the first hacker to ever be put on the FBI top 10 list, a guy named Kevin Mitnick. Now, I ended up running to Kevin years later. We actually did some things together. But here's a guy who went to prison, who was a hacker, who was a criminal, but yet he's now able to turn that thing around. He's now a multimillionaire.
Wow.
Because, he's using his skills, a company called Know4 and stuff. He does some stuff. But it's kind of like, again, it goes back to where are the breaks for the good people who didn't go to prison, who didn't do time, I didn't have to pee into a cup and visit my probation officer. It's one of those frustrating things. Hey, look, good for them that they've turned their life around. But on the other hand, we've got to be careful about how far we glorify people and how high of a pedestal we put people on to reward them for doing the same shit you, I, and Murph were doing for years without getting that pat on the back every week.
True. Very well.
Okay. Second digression. Now back to a regularly scheduled podcast in our drinking game. That is drink number 2. Hey, but before we talk about getting into the FBI, you guessed your way in. We want to.
I love this.
Hey, how did you may have touched on it earlier, but how did you handle the issue of your citizenship?
Well, I became a citizen. That was the.
Wait, duh. I kind of figured that out. Even for a state and local guy, I kind of figured that out. The question was how you solved that. I mean, when did that process? Once they identified it, how long did? Because normally that's like a 10-year process.
No, back then it was weird because I applied for it. I was living at that time in Elizabeth, New Jersey, so I went to and applied, and then they called me in to do an interview. So it was kind of funny because, and I challenge a lot of Americans for this too. They would
To take
ask
the
you like,
history test.
right, who are what are the Bill of Rights? Who's your congressman? Who are your senators? And all of these questions I was being asked. And then again, divine intervention kicked in. And I, was winging and coming out of whatever I could. And the guy looked at me and he says, "Look, you're definitely a college grad, you play ball, you're a nice guy and all. Let me ask you some more questions." Boom. The next thing you know, he says, "Passed," and I got it. I got it all within a year. I became a citizen in the bicentennial year of 1976. I applied for the FBI when I graduated college in 1975. So it took only a few months. It wasn't like it is now with lines around the corner. Back then, for whatever reason, I was able to get through. And once I got that, they reinstated my background investigation, all of my thing. But keep in mind, it took me longer time to become an FBI agent. As much I was later on, I found out I was the second Cuban-born FBI agent. And there was, when I filed for my Freedom of Information Privacy Act, there was so many memos from the agency saying I should not be hired because I am a Cuban born and the possibility that I could be a mole infiltrating the FBI could be. So when I got in 1980 in the FBI, there was maybe two, but I want to say one other FBI agent who was Cuban descent. There weren't Cubans at all. Mostly by that time, it was Puerto Rican, Mexican Americans, and then there were a lot of Mormons because they did a lot of their missionary work and they spoke perfect Spanish. And Hoover liked hiring a lot of them because of that. But there weren't any Cubans. It wasn't until much later on when they realized that, hey, we left Cuba because of communism. We don't, this is what we're against.
This wasn't a 20-year plan by the Cuban intelligence service to plant me, Jack Garcia, to become an FBI agent. I mean,
sleep them all.
Yeah, not that it hasn't happened, but you actually answered my question because I was going to say, we all know what it takes to do a background just to get on, and then a background to get security clearances. Being from Cuba had to complicate things because there's no way they could really go back at that point in time and interview people and talk to anybody. I mean, how did they handle the background in terms of getting back to Cuba or talking to anybody from Cuba?
Well, that's a good question. They weren't able to do that. They would have to rely on maybe stuff that was in files about to see whether any of my relatives. And at that time, just so you know, my mother's sister, my aunt, was still in Cuba, and she was a supporter of Castro. But all of these things I discussed during my interview and say, hey, listen, that was my aunt. I used to love her as a kid, but I know my mother doesn't talk to her. She hasn't been in touch with us. So I think part of the test was that they wanted to make sure you were telling the truth. And then you add to that a polygraph exam. So you really undergo a little more scrutiny. And I think in hindsight, rightfully so. But I had to go through a lot to become the second Cuban-born FBI agent. And but yeah, it was kind of interesting for me,
Well, you said you were 9 years old when you came here, so
I was 9 years old. Yeah,
not a lot in your background at that point in Cuba that they could access other than family members.
Yeah, but it reminds me. Do you remember the case of Ana Montes, the DIA?
Oh yes, that's a great case.
She was spying for Cuba, but she was born in West Germany, and believe it or not, lived in Topeka, Kansas for a while. Then they moved out to Towson, Maryland. Hey, don't give me the head shake, Murph. Don't give me the head shake. We can talk about. Let me talk about what was his name. Drew Hogan again wasn't good enough for the Highway Patrol, so they hired him at DEA.
Hey, don't say anything about DEA. Poor DEA. You know what DEA stands for, right?
Don't expect anything. Drunk every afternoon.
Don't even ask.
Don't even ask.
I haven't heard that one. That's a good one. And FBI is forever bothering Italians.
Well, we heard that too. Well, we thought famous but incompetent. That's the other one I heard.
There's another one, but I won't even say it.
Go ahead, say it. I've heard it all.
Fumbling, bumbling idiots.
And then, of course, Murph calls the CIA clowns in action. Boy,
Yeah.
we got ATF. Well, we used to call ATF stood for after the fire because that's when they normally showed up.
Well, that one is actually adopted.
Oh, that's a good one. Oh, man.
Anyway, but no, the reason I say that, but that wasn't until, I was just pulling that up real quick. She was arrested, I think in 2000, actually just right after 9/11. She was.
But didn't she work at the FBI, Montez, or for the government?
Yeah, she worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency.
Intelligence, okay.
Yeah, DIA. Yeah, but what I'm saying is, they could talk about Cubans, but it's not so much where you're born. It's your beliefs. It's your ideology. They were able to recruit her by playing on those things. For 17 years, she did that, and she was born in West Germany. So, I mean, it's kind of like, you guys, you're missing the forest for the trees. To your point, look at the background. You fled Cuba. It's not like Fidel gave you a first-class ticket to say, hey, we love you, go to New York, insert yourself, go to public school, don't speak English, get in trouble, and then join the FBI, and then, spy for us. I mean, that's kind of such a ludicrous line of thought. But you mentioned something I want to talk about, and it must have been for your book, right? So the FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, allows you to go back and file a request to the government to produce documents. How big was your FOIA packet when you got that? Is that what you did it for, was to write the book, to see what was written about you?
No, I actually did it when I was on the job. As soon as I got in, I decided somebody told me, he goes, you should check into that, because I wanted to know how you go from recruiting heavily for Spanish-speaking agents. And then, of course, I wasn't getting in, even though with divine intervention and that, I still passed the test. So I was wondering why it took me such a long time to get in. So I really thought that the Bureau didn't want me for that, for whatever reason. So
Wasn't that like firing a shot across their bow? You're just a new agent, and here you are filing a FOIA request to say, what the hell were you guys doing?
Yeah, but I didn't do it like immediately, within about a year. And by that time, I knew people in the office. I got along with everybody. And some agents were doing it too. They were all like, hey, let's just check the Freedom of Information private. So, of course, I did it as well. And it took like a while to get. And, of course, you get the redacted and all of that. But I was just curious to find out what it was.
Did you get any blowback from your supervisors, your SSAs, or the SAC or
No,
anything?
I tell you what, my first office was Newark, New Jersey. It was just great. The people there, I was one of those guys who was, I came in and I was blessed to be put in what we used to call a heavy squad that handled bank robberies, fugitives, terrorism. And I was like a new agent there, which is, it's unheard of that you would land there. Most of those guys are all SWAT guys, experienced agent. And the reason I landed there was because I spoke Spanish. And at that time, we were investigating Omega 7. Omega 7 was an anti-Castro group that operated in the U.S., and they were single-handedly blowing up any businesses that dealt with Cuba. They even went as far as assassinating a diplomat. So they needed somebody to build a network of informants in the Union City, which was predominantly New Jersey community for Cubans. So I was blessed because of my Spanish to be able to learn and work among such fantastic guys. But I got to know everybody. It wasn't done like, let me get my Freedom of Information just to see. It was more like a casual non-event, really. Nobody said anything to me about that.
All right. Well, I thought when you said you were on a heavy squad, it's because you were 6'4", 300. So I didn't know if that was the way.
that was probably
but
it.
Usually for the door ram.
Well, I say that in jest, but I also say that as when I think, and when most people think of an FBI agent, man or woman, somebody who's 6'4", 300 pounds, trying to work, that may have been one of your best gifts too, in terms of working undercover, because they're looking at you going, no way this guy's an FBI agent. I mean, you had to be one of the biggest guys on the squad.
Well, let me tell you a bit about that, because in my book, I talk about this. What happened was I played football about 260 in college, right? I applied for the FBI. I never looked big. I'd always looked like I was a power lifter. I was a big guy, but not big fat guy, big guy, kind of.
What position did you play
A
in
defensive
football?
tackle. Now, the part you're going to love, Morgan, is that I went and before you became an agent and went to Quantico, you get sworn in at that time, was at the Newark office, which recruited me. I went in, no problem. I get down to Quantico, and for some reason, some assistant director down there has a hard on for me. And he's looking at me working out. Now, grant you, I didn't go in top shape to Quantico, but then again, when I was in training for the football season, I never went in, and that's why I got into shape during the course of it. Well, anyway, he then calls me into the office and say, the chart, and you know that famous chart that if you're 6'4",
height, weight proportional,
right? I'm supposed to weigh like 200 pounds. You kidding me? 200 pounds? I was like 12 years old when I was 200 pounds. So he says to me, we're giving you two choices. You can resign, lose the weight that we'll set up for you for losing this, and you could come back. Or if you don't resign, you will be fired and you can't be reinstated. Now, this is after 12 days. Now, I'm doing what everybody else is doing. I'm not the last guy running by any means. The guy just took offense to me. Okay. Now, what happens is I go home and I'm thinking, shit, they didn't want me. The unknown FBI from outside, it's a whole different than what it is in the inside, So I said to myself, well, I guess they didn't want me. Now, I had quit my job with the Union County Prosecutor's Office. They gave me a going away party. So what am I going to do now? Go back and say, hey, guys, I want to come back. Well, what happened? Well, I got fired because I was too fat. Are you freaking kidding me? That's embarrassing. So I sat there, and it wasn't until the class counselor sent me a postcard with all the names of the people in the class, wrote, lose the weight, come back, beat these fuckers. And I got that, and all of a sudden I heard the theme from Rocky. I went out there, I started working out, and I lost the weight. So before I was sworn in, I had to be weighed. But they made my weight not 220 pounds, they made it to 240. So I weighed at 240, went down there, and the class that I was originally in was still there. And I come in, and they all welcome me back. And so I went through a lot, because for that time, the 2 months that I took, because I went to the class in February, but I came back in April. So all of that time, I was unemployed. And I didn't want to go back to my Union County Prosecutor's Office because I was embarrassed. So I worked out every day, didn't eat, lost the weight, and successfully, graduated from the academy. But that was probably also could be one of the reasons I decided for the Freedom of Information Act. I wanted to see, what the hell was that all about? Was it because I was a second Cuban FBI agent?
Well, what the hell was that all about? What was up this guy's rectum that he decided that you were going to be his target? Where you just, I mean, I get everybody, there's always some class where somebody does something, but you didn't do anything other than show up and be there. Did you ever figure out what was Asshat's problem?
Listen, I could speculate, but this guy didn't like me. I think his name was Jim McKenzie or something like that. And he had a hard on for me, and he decided he was such a coward that he did not even hit me face to face. He had some of his lackeys approach me with that decision to leave, which I thought it was bad. At least give me a fighting chance. You have to. If I didn't make the physical, then by all means I would have been sent home. I get that, but you don't have a grown man who has a job, and I didn't have a family at the time, but leave and go there and you expose them to this and then say, well, we got second thoughts on the guy. What we're going to do is he doesn't fit the weight standard. But that's not my fault. You guys should have picked that up. I don't go home at night and memorize the chart. If I didn't fit the chart, somebody should have said, he doesn't qualify, period.
Well, before you even got sworn in, before you showed up, it should have said, "Hey, we're going to swear you in as soon as you drop this weight." That would have been a different thing. But
Right.
that's hey. Now rewind
Oh,
for just.
wait a minute. When you came back in April, was he still there?
Yes, he was still there.
What was his position then?
He was the same. He was the assistant director.
He's still
in charge of it.
He's still a dick, right?
Oh, a huge dick. And the guy was like, never had the courtesy to even call me in
and say,
hey, listen, I had to do this, congratulate, but none of that. And you know what? And that just tells you about a person's character.
Right.
And to me, what really impressed me was how great the counselor was. His name was Jim Pledger. Man was a great guy, and the classmates of mine made me feel welcome. And everybody who I tell this story to is in awe of it. But it happened to me. Mm-hmm. I was terminated after 12 days, not because I flunked the test, not because I couldn't do something, not because I gave up. It's because I didn't fit the weight standards at the time, which they should have told me, like, hey, you don't meet the weight standards. You got to get down to that weight. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, move on.
Yeah.
So that was my issue with them.
Well, let's rewind for just a second. I don't want to spend
too much time on Kansas.
Yeah. Hey, talk real quick. You said the Union County prosecutor. So what were you doing at the prosecutor's office?
I was working welfare fraud, and it's mostly it's part of identifying all the fraud that consists of in the welfare system. I was hired with them as an investigator, a criminal investigator, because all my previous experience I had in the paternity unit in the welfare board. So I knew the welfare rules. So our job was to identify, either to a tip or on our own, follow this, create a case on the individual, and immediately, get them arrested for committing welfare fraud. So it was very busy squad.
So did this involve a lot of math?
No.
Thank God. Okay.
Yes.
Right. No, you kind of glossed over that, but I just wanted to kind of complete that, as that's what you were doing beforehand. So you dropped out. How long did it, and I think you mentioned this, how long did it take you to lose the weight before you came back in?
Well, I was February 4th class. I left on the 12th. So that's 8 days, not 12 days. And then I came back on May 4th class. So we got
about 3 months.
February, 3 months. Yeah, and there were times, by the way, I didn't even eat. I mean, I really went on this crusade to lose the weight, not just for myself, just so I could shove it in that guy's ass, mm-hmm. because what he did to me.
How much weight did you lose?
Well, I was 265 when I got weighed by them before I was let go. But on the way home, I stopped at every ice cream parlor, every McDonald's, every Burger King. I blew up like a tick on the way home. And then I go home, I'm eating like I'm going to the chair because I'm saying, they got their way. They got rid of me. This is a bullshit. Who would believe this is an excuse? And I ate it. And it wasn't until I got that postcard from Jim Pledger, the counselor, that I realized, hey, you know what? It's that jerk off who caused this to happen. And it was a personal vendetta for whatever reason he had, because all of this stuff could have been prevented if that was an issue. When I went up to get the guy should have said, hey, wait a minute, you look too big. Why didn't they say that?
Yeah. Hey, did you ever watch Band of Brothers?
No. I've heard of it. I've been wanting. I got that on my to-do list.
You should watch it, because there is a character in there that will remind you of this guy. I'll just tell you this. His name is Captain Sobel. And this is the same kind of guy who dicks with everybody, messes with everybody, including Dick Winters, who becomes ends up being a higher rank than this guy, becomes a hero during World War II and D-Day. And the same thing is because one of the great scenes is when he was second Lieutenant Winters, now he's Major Winters. Captain Sobel is still a captain. He's the kind of guy that, the colonel brings him in and says, you've done a hell of a good job training people. We're going to send you back to train more people, because they don't want you anywhere near the front lines, because you're a walking, steaming pile of crap. Anyway, when you watch that, this guy will be Captain Sobel. So let's talk about then getting through the academy. Did you once you were back there, you said the guy left you alone, no problems, you graduated on time?
No, he didn't. He, of course, when I got weighed in Newark, I met the weight. I came down there. I had to go wait again. And again, not for him. He would have others do this for his bidding. And then, of course, didn't have any problem with, because, as you know, in the police academies, there are three facets of it. There is the physical facet, there is the academic, and then there's the firearms. I didn't have problems with firearms. I didn't ever thought I had problems with physical, because no matter what, I mean, I played football in college. I got into shape to play football. This is to get into shape for the FBI. To do what? A mile and a half and 50 push-ups? You know what I mean? So I could have done that easily. But the academics, to me, is what I found difficult. And I really, through my whole career, even though my parents pushed education, I was always slacking about it. And I remember a dear friend of mine who has passed away, another agent named TJ Murray. Him and I would just sit for countless hours and just, he would teach me how to study and work and really pulled me through in preparing me for these exams. So that was the part that I found it tough. And also failing grade at the academy is 85, which, a lot of
That's
people on the outside.
That's a B in most universities,
Exactly. So to me, I really dedicated myself to it. And I was passed. It was such an honor for me to have graduated with the FBI. And of course, when you're down there, all you get is your badge. And as you know, the FBI badge is a little tiny thing. And you don't get your credentials until they're handed to you.
Are you saying you have badge envy, Jack?
Yes, I do. Those little badges, really, we need to redo that again. No one believes it. Everybody goes, what is that?
Hey, you got the bubblegum machine.
Yes, exactly. A very small badge. And then what happened is once you get your creds, I had to report to my first office, Newark, and I loved it. I look back on my career. I loved it. Yes, there were plenty of assholes like that guy who gave me heat with my weight. But there's also was so many great men and women that I went back. And I worked in a lot of offices. I was in Newark. I was in New York, Philadelphia. I've been in San Juan. I've been in Miami. I've been Philadelphia. And I just thoroughly enjoyed it. But after 26 years, I had to pull the plug. I said, I'm out. I passed the baton. Let somebody else do this.
Well, let's continue on then with your career, because you got onto, you said, the heavy squad, and that's where we really did a digression. So drinking game, that's number 3. So you started working bank robberies and stuff. So what was it like getting past the academy, getting past all of the stuff, having your badge, your creds, the gun, and actually starting to do some real work? What did that, what was that like to finally get in the game? It's like being football. You don't want to ride the bench. You want to be in the game. You want to play a position. What was it like to get into the game now?
It was great, but I handled it differently. I know some people, as you know, in law enforcement, you get somebody out of the academy and they're like a blue flamer. They got to be right and doing this, and they're just running around with the heads cut off. I took the opposite approach. I came in, I knew that this was a heavy squad of guys with great reputations. So I kind of took hey, I'm here if you need me. Any help that you want, any time of the day, I'm available. I remember they would go out on a fugitive arrest. They would cut me out because I was the new guy, the FNG. So they would go and they would do their stuff. And I was willing to I paid my dues. They were checking me out because just like when you go to work on any squad, you got to make your own rep, And I was there, willing to work. And then finally, when I got into it with them, they brought me in as one of them. And that feeling of a teamwork, it's kind of like being in a football team. It's kind of like, you're around guys, you all have a mission, you accomplish the mission safely, you go back. It was part of something. I loved it. I love working fugitives. Now, keep in mind, this is 1980. We didn't start working dope until, what was it, Steve? 84, right? I think it was 84. The FBI started working dope because DEA couldn't do it. Steve, come on, it's a joke.
Nice shot.
That was a shot, right? No. They somehow, I don't know whose idea it was, but anyway, they started working as dope. Now, because I speak Spanish, I was a perfect guy for that. And I started working narcotics. And ever since that, that's all I did through my career is work narcotics everywhere, and worked a lot of cases with DEA, some great men and women. I worked with them in Philly and New York and Newark. And of course, we had our battles just like they had the battle with us. And it's weird because I was talking to Steve a while back, and I said to him, when you go out there to do a case, you run into so many other agencies that are out there working dope. So you either have DEA, ATF, immigration, customs, local police department, FBI, and it becomes one giant clusterfuck. So you have to constantly, the guy, when I'm doing the undercover, I'm on the street, so I don't know what's happening. But the other agents will see another car going by a couple of times. They will pull them over. What are you here for? Well, we're here because we're here. Some big guy is buying some dope from this guy. Well, forget that. Forget the mission. It's over. We go home. So we had a lot of dry runs because we kept stepping on each other. If I had it all over, they should have one giant office where all the different alphabet agencies are all working together. So there is no going out there and ending the mission. But that happened.
What kind of dope are you smoking? Everybody's going to get into a room and work together? I mean, come on.
You know what? You're right, but that's the same as all these agencies that we kept stepping on each other. And it was horrible all the time.
Well, and that's why there's been so much set up for deconfliction. They used to have a system called IndyPix, the National Drug Pointer Intelligence System, I think. There's so many cases ended up. I can't remember which episode it was, Murph, or if you were telling me about it, but no, it was you down in Miami. Wasn't there a blue on blue? You guys were doing an investigation. You were investigating them. They were investigating you, and it turned out to be cops.
It's Hialeah PD. Yeah. We're doing surveillance on them. They're surveilling us.
I know it happens all the time. It's kind of crazy, but yeah, that's when we started working, dope. And I personally liked it, to me, because it was new for us. It was also, when you work narcotics, there's a lot of stats that are results from it. There's also, you get to do everything from testifying, search warrants, arrest warrants. It kind of keeps you in the mix of what law enforcement it's all about. It isn't having to draft a search warrant for one particular case. It just constantly keeps you moving. Dope cases I love working with it. It was just something. And then I got working more undercover just solely because I spoke Spanish. And as I got in the bureau, that 240 became 245, 250, 260, 270 in my weight. And then I grew the hair, the typical goatee, the earring. And next thing you know, I just started working undercover because, I didn't look like an agent.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what I was getting at. I mean, you don't fit the mold of somebody who looks like a UC. You look like a big, if we were talking, when we talked to Jay Dobbins, did his episode, ATF, Jaybird, you get big guys, they're outlaw motorcycle gangs, or they're big, like you say, Colombian or, drug dealers. But the FBI also has, did you have a challenge? Did they have the fitness test back then? Did you have to pass an annual or a biannual fitness test?
Well, we had the physical every year. And the good thing is my birthday, which, by the way, I'm hoping you guys send me a gift. I'll be 70 years old. Anyway.
We got you.
We're going to send you a gift on your birthday, but we're not going to tell people what actual day it is. But suffice it to say, you're turning a big milestone here.
Yes. And but
the fitness test.
Right, the fitness test. The interesting part about that is that my birthday came the day, usually before the budget was approved on October 1st. So they always ran out of money. So that means the physicals were canceled. So I was like, I'm ready for my physical. Oh, shucks, really? Shit, man, I missed it. I didn't take physicals for a long time ago. And when you work in New York City, nobody gives a rat's ass what you look like. You're out there dealing with traffic. You're out there dealing with parking. You're out there dealing with all kinds of criminals. Who's going to bother you with this stuff? So nobody really cared. And I kind of felt, when nobody really cared what I was looking like or how big I got. If anything, they said, well, the big is going to help them in the case. They left me alone. Now, that didn't happen all the time. When I was working in Philadelphia, I had a crazy supervisor who, no matter I finished working undercover, wanted me in so he could weigh me because he was gunning for me. But I got out of Philadelphia as soon as possible and went to New York. No regrets. I love being in New York. No one cared about anything. You just wanted to survive your tour in New York. To me, it was home.
Well, before we get into talking about the big case, we want to talk about some of your work you did UC against organized crime, La Cosa Nostra. There's some interesting stuff too, comes out of your book and everything. But you did some work down in Miami, because Miami not only had a problem with corruption and the Mariolito boat lift, like you said, but they ended up having a lot of problems with cops and dope and stuff down there. And it's always a tough thing to have to work cases against law enforcement. But at the end of the day, that's one of the big things the FBI does is when it becomes to, civil rights violations, when it comes to corruption, public corruption, that's one of your mandates. So just talk a little bit about that case down there, or a couple of the cases where unfortunately you had to target law enforcement. But Murph and I will tell you, it's a standard thing we say. Nobody hates a bad cop more than a good cop, and you don't want this stuff going on. So talk to us a little bit about Miami.
Well, it's weird. I got into, as you know, we handled that violation, and I started working it. I worked lots of cases of police corruption cases. It was in Broward County, Hollywood Police Department, Boston Police Department, San Juan, Puerto Rico. And you're right. Having corrupt cops don't help us in law enforcement. Our job is to root them out. The problem that I found in law enforcement, there are some police departments that look at it as like, hey, if the guy's a bad cop, that's not our problem. We just stay away from him. But I always respond, it is your problem. You need to identify this dirty guy because he's a reflection of all of us. So we need to eradicate this guy. But some people are still in that mentality that if you're internal affairs, you're a rat. It's called the rat squad. Or even guys that I work with in the NYPD, because we had a task force, it would be as like, you work in cops? I go, of course I'm working dirty cop. They're bad. They make our business bad. Working them, I always played the role of either a wise guy or I played the role of a drug dealer, and they would move items for me. We were quite successful in some of the cases that, we work, and it's considered one of the priorities in the FBI. So I write in my book about the Hollywood Police Department. I didn't write about the Boston Police Department. That was just a horrible thing. But people say the cops, we worked in conjunction with the police. When we worked the Boston Police Department, we took down about 13 guys. I think it was 13. We were partners with the Boston Police Department. So they worked alongside us. So it isn't just us doing something. Hollywood was a little different. We didn't include the Hollywood Police Department for whatever reason, but then at the end we had a problem with them giving us up as we were moving further into the police department. So working police corruption cases, it's kind of gives you a mixed feeling because it kind of destroys why would these people violate the oath and tarnish the badge that we so proudly wear?
That's the echoes of Serpico we were just talking about earlier. I mean, you listen to this and it's like watching Serpico and looking at what's happening now. It's like, guys, this is the problem. If you don't police your own, and we have to come in and do it, like say from an FBI standpoint, that creates conflict. It creates friction. It creates consent decrees, which then are held over those agencies' heads for a long time. And that's the thing it goes back to. But if you've got the cooperation to say, look, when a department says we don't want dirty cops either, and if you know something we don't, let's work together to do it. But when they work against you, I mean, that's not only violates the public trust, it violates the ability for the public to actually trust you that you're doing the right thing for them.
Well, my chapter in the Hollywood Police Department, it worked against. We were working these Hollywood police officers, and I'm not talking rookies. I'm talking guys with 17 years on the job. We were working them. They were bringing other players into it. We're working. All of a sudden, the special agent in charge said, hey, listen, these are our partners. We need to include them. we told them, don't include them because I actually met the chief, and the chief is good friends with one of the targets that I'm working. So says, sorry, we're going to have to. Sure enough, they have a meeting. Within a week or two, the guy stops taking my phone calls. I go down to Florida to see him. He's ignoring me. The guy goes MIA. They found him and the other cops all decided to retire to save their pension. Then it turned out to be that they started accusing us that there was a leak and it came from the FBI, which was a total lie. And then we find out that the chief told some people who in turn told a girl that one of the detectives that we were looking at, she confided in them. And once they heard that we were agents, she automatically, these guys went and retired. Now, that put us in harm's way because what happens when you're an undercover and all of a sudden this stuff is leaked, as far as us being undercover agent, was to keep these guys from whacking us, was to keep these guys from doing something because they now know our identity, which is what we're worried. And listen, that happened in New York. They had those two killer cops, Caracappa and I forgot the other guy's name. But you don't want, it's got to be well maintained. And it's because we decided to go forward and telling the chief, he opened up his big mouth. And next thing you know, the case was ended. And we had so many opportunities to get more dirty cops, but they worked on the premise of this. Like the guy would say over and over to me, look, all you got to do is I'll bring you a cop. You give him a bag or a box, and you say to him, take this box to such and such a place. They're not going to look in the box. They're not going to ask about the box. They're not going to look for documentation. But you guys want to tell them what's in the box. And I told them, I said, they need to know what they're doing because I don't want them to find religion, open the box, find some illicit contraband, and then come and lock me up. So I want them to know, of course, we don't want that plausible deniability there. They're going to say, hey, I didn't know anything. So we lost a lot of guys that we could have had, but their mindset was that, hey, I'll do whatever you guys want me to do. I'll drive this car to this place, but don't ask what's in the car, in the trunk. I don't want to know. So it became a little tough for us to bring these guys, but those are the kind of guys that we were dealing with. There were a lot of these mentalities of these police officers that, first of all, as we all know in law enforcement, somebody gave me a box and say, hey, a guy who looks like me, okay, driving an Escalade, and some other guys, and say, take this box and bring it over to so-and-so. He would say, what are you, nuts? What's in there? I'm not going to see, what do you got? But they didn't want to know. So we obviously didn't go out and prosecute them because we had nothing on them.
Yeah, and that's one of the elements of crime. You have to prove knowledge. But the fact that they were not inquisitive enough as an experienced police officer to ask, the truth is they were an experienced police officer and knew you couldn't prove knowledge. That's why they didn't want to know.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's not one of our professionals. That's not somebody that belongs with us.
No, and I think we told this little story earlier too, Murph, when we were at the Southern California Gang Conference. There was a guy down there, a former NYPD cop, who went to jail for 14 years for working with one of the crime families or drug traffickers. And this guy was like nonchalant about it. He was like laughing. It's like it's the funny thing. And we had a couple of people said, oh, you should have this guy on your show. And then they said you should have his partner on your show. And me and Murph go, not a chance. Because you know why? We might have him on the show if they showed contrition, if this was really a story of redemption, is, look, I did something wrong. I want you guys to learn. He when we first met him, he goes, I'm podcast gold. I'm like, what the fuck do you mean? He said, I'm podcast gold. People get me on the podcast. They love it because of my story. And I'm going, well, I can tell you one podcast you're not going to be on.
That's right. That's right.
Well, no, it irks you because it goes back to, think about this too, Murph. It's like when I started, I made $7.50 an hour starting off as a rookie cop. And, when I was,
less than that.
yeah. And when I was a cop in Garden City, I joined the police department to get on into investigations. But as a city cop, I stopped a car one night. It's got $202,000 in the trunk. Long story short, I mean, it's just these guys were involved in buying dope. Now, here I am. I wouldn't have made $200,000 in 10 years at my job paying child support, was divorced and remarried. But you know what never crossed my mind? It never crossed my mind taking the money. You know what the money was to me? It's a trophy shot. It's like, look what I did, motherfuckers. I call up my friends and it's like, hey, I had people call me, said, I heard about the seizure. It's a trophy shot. People like us live for that trophy. It's like, we got it. The thought of taking the money never, ever crossed my mind because you're just not wired that way. Now, I used to joke with people. They say, well, how much did you find? It's not a question of how much I found. It's how much I turned in. Wink, wink, But no, I was joking with them. But I had plenty. Just for the record, I had plenty of witnesses there. We counted that money twice. No, but that's to your point, is that when you're doing it for the right reasons, stuff like that, dope money never crossed your mind. If I had found 100 kilos of coke, it would have been, I'm seizing this, I'm arresting your ass, because I want that trophy shot when I go drinking and somebody says, I got a story for you. I want to, you want to be one of those guys that, oh, I've got a story for you too. Here's mine, and it's like guys unzipping their pants, hey, check me out,
Yeah, no, you're right. Well, listen, it's a dirty business, and I'm sure, when we used to do a lot of dope, and I'm sure the large volumes that Steve did. I mean, you walk into locations, millions of dollars are in place, But that's why I've always believed in working with a partner. It's always good to have that. It's always the same thing in law enforcement. If I ever interview a female, I want another female with me. I don't want the allegations being made. I don't want anybody ever saying, well, this guy was alone with this. It's nowadays, because keep in mind, guys, nowadays, when we all testify, the fact that we're law enforcement is not really something that people will revere. They attack us, understands. I mean, we've all testified. I have been attacked, and it's all like, provide all giglio information. What about this? And it's all trying to get you painted as a bad person. Where in the first time when I got in the bureau in the 80s, we were like, hey, FBI, if whatever he says is it. But now we're attacked. So you have to be careful, not only when you're out there in the streets alone, but also you have to be careful everywhere. And I always believe in always bring somebody along
in the interview room and stuff. Hey, we got to do something real quick too. We violated one of our old rules, and I wrote this down earlier because you used an acronym and then we used a term. So we have to define all acronyms. So earlier we know what it means, but FNG. Tell everybody what FNG is.
That's a fucking new guy.
Yeah. If you've ever watched Blue Thunder with Roy Scheider, they had a different hat. It's called Jaffo. They said they had, what's that mean, Jaffo? Just another fucking observer. So you wore the Jaffo hat. And then you said Giglio. So let folks know what
Giglio material is. Any kind of stuff that's in your files against you. Let's say, for instance, you have been busted for lying in an investigation,
perjury,
or perjured yourself some kind of way, or you lack candor in an internal investigation. That has to be prevented. That has to be submitted to the defense, and they, of course, could attack you with that and make you less credible to the jury.
Hey, players, that is the end of part one. Part two, as always, comes out on Thursday. In the meantime, check us out at Game of Crimes on Twitter, at Game of Crimes Podcast on Facebook, at the Instagram. But where you got to be, got to be on patreon.com/Game of Crimes. We have a ton of good stuff, including, if you are at the right level, Guardian of the Realm and Warden of the Throne, we have just released part one, episode one of The Real DEA Narcos, talking about the real DEA Narcos, Cali edition. Chris Feistel and Dave Mitchell go in depth, 16 hours, about how they took down the Cali cartel. Information you will not hear anywhere else in the world, not on Netflix, not anywhere, not in a book, only right here on Game of Crimes at patreon.com/Game of Crimes. In the meantime, also go check out our webpage, gameofcrimespodcast.com. We've got the latest merch, pictures for every episode that we put up, books that our guests write. We only put up books that they write. We put them up there. So we thank you once again for being a player in the biggest, baddest, most dangerous game of all, the Game of Crimes.